the APRG seminar. So our speaker the same old Narayanan, but with a different look. So he calls it a young look. So Narayanan from our department will give the seminar today. The title of his talk is Injectivity Sets for, what is it? Injectivity of spherical means on H-type.
Okay, so thank you. And let me see if I can share the screen. Okay. I hope you can see the screen now, right?
Yes. Okay. To make it full view.
Well, it is already full view. Oh, is it difficult to read?
No. Maybe maybe for me. No, I think it's.
Can anybody else confirm? Is this okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this seems fine. Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah, there is too much of noise. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so let us start. So I'll be talking about spherical means and the injectivity of spherical means on H-type groups. I'll spend some time on Euclidean spaces and then on
Naru's internet has broken maybe.
yeah, is it okay now?
No.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Yeah, it's okay. But
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But it's again quiet.
Yeah, I think the let me change the connection.
Okay.
Is this okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me share again. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think both my connections are somewhat bad now, but hopefully I can continue. Yeah. Okay, so I hope the screen is visible now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, we'll start with Rn. Well, Rm, because this is going to be the dimension of the m is going to be the dimension of the center of the H-type group. So the question is, can you determine a continuous function from its averages over a sphere? So, well, one wants to reconstruct or have an inversion formula for a function, for a, let's say, continuous function using its averages. So the average, by averages you mean the spherical means, which is defined just next in the next line. I'll come to that. But so essentially you are looking at points and spheres centered at those points and averages of the function over those spheres, right? So you can move the points and you can move the radius also. So you may have, depending on your problem, your points x may be in some set and your radius may be in some set. Okay. So here we are looking at a particular question where the radius is fixed. So the radius is fixed, but the points x can be on the whole domain. Okay, so on all of R. So these averages are called spherical means, and it's defined to be simply the convolution of f with nu r. So the notation we will be using again and again, nu r. That is going to be the surface measure on the sphere of radius r centered at the origin. Okay, so the average of the function over a sphere of radius r centered at x is simply f convolved with nu r. Okay, so that is that's the definition of the spherical means. Okay, so it comes up in various various problems in harmonic analysis on Rn and other groups as well. So the injectivity question we are interested in is, suppose the convolution is 0. So remember that R is fixed, and you are looking at just one radius, and f convolved with nu R is 0 for all x. So it's an identically 0 function. The convolution is identically 0. The question is f identically 0? So this is the injectivity. So you need injectivity to do an inversion, right? So so this is one of the first questions you should be looking at. Okay. Well, so in general, the answer is no, and it's not very difficult to see what goes wrong. So if I take the exponential function e sub x naught at y equal to e to the I x naught dot y. So remember, we are in Rm, that is the inner product on Rm. Then if you convolve an exponential with the function, you will get the Fourier transform of the function or the measure times the exponential back, right? So e sub x naught convolved with nu r is nu r hat at x naught times e x naught. And well, nu r, remember, is the normalized surface measure on the sphere of radius r centered at the origin. And so its Fourier transform is the Bessel function, we know that. And it has zeros, right? So you just have to take an x naught such that nu r hat x naught is 0, and so the convolution will be identically 0. Okay, so the injectivity in general is not true, and this function e to the I x naught dot y is an L infinity function, right? So a continuous, well, nice C infinity function in bounded C infinity function. So there is no injectivity for a fixed radius in the class of smooth functions, smooth bounded functions. You can do better because the measure nu r is rotation invariant, it's radial. So you can radialize e sub x naught, the exponential, and you will still have a similar formula, and that is also well known. So for lambda greater than 0, define phi lambda. So phi lambda is the Bessel function. So remember, our space is Rm, and I'm looking at Jm by 2 minus 1. So where J is the Bessel, Jm by 2 minus 1 is the Bessel function. Jm by 2 minus 1 lambda mod x by lambda mod x to the m by 2 minus 1. So it's an important function. It's the radial eigenfunctions of Laplacian on Rm. And you have this convolution formula for these functions. Phi lambda convolved with the nu r is phi lambda r. So that is something you should notice. I am not going to make this distinction between a radial function on Rm and an even function on the real line, right? So any radial function on Rm can be viewed as an even function on the real line and vice versa. So phi lambda r will simply mean phi lambda at x, where mod x is r for any x, right? Because it's a radial function. So phi lambda convolved with nu r is equal to phi lambda r times phi lambda x. So that is this is the product formula. So this formula can be interpreted in many ways, but I would like you to keep this in mind because this is going to come up in both the Heisenberg group and H-type group as well, and it's one of the fundamental things we will be using. Now remember, phi lambda is simply the Bessel function, and it has positive zeros. So you simply take an r, just like earlier with the exponential. You simply take an r where phi lambda is 0 and injectivity fails, right? Because the convolution is identically 0. Now, if you look at the asymptotics of the Bessel functions, you can see that these functions phi lambda, they belong to LP if and only if P is strictly greater than 2m by m minus 1. Okay, so which means that the injectivity fails for LP functions for P in this range 2m by m minus 1 less than P less than or equal to infinity. Infinity case we already saw with the exponential, right? But by radializing, you get more decay for the exponential, you get Bessel functions, and you have injectivity failing in a larger range 2m by m minus 1 to infinity. Okay. So let's look at the positive results now. So one of the old results due to Saltzman. This was proved before I was born. F convolved with, so if you take two radii, so F convolved with the nu R and F convolved with the nu S, if both of them are 0, identically 0, then F is identically 0. So that is the injectivity we are looking at, except that now you have two radii, provided the ratio of these radii is not a ratio of the, oh sorry, I should have written ratio of the zeros of the Bessel function. Okay. So that statement is R by S is not a ratio of the zeros of the Bessel function, J m by 2 minus 1. M by 2 minus 1 is something which will keep coming up in Rm. So this is because the collection of measures nu R and nu S, if R by S satisfies this condition, they will not have common zeros on the Fourier transform side. And because they are radial, one can view them as distributions on the real line, and fundamental theorem due to Schwartz tells you that they generate essentially everything you want. And then you can get the delta function from that, and F convolved with delta will be 0, so F will be 0. Okay. So, and this is true for class of continuous functions. So that takes care of a large class of functions, but we need two radii. So we come to one radius theorem. So due to Thangavelu, F convolved with the mu. Oh, so again there is a problem there. F convolved with mu R. So I should have written nu R. Mu will be used for something else in the next few slides. So F convolved with nu R is 0. Implies F is 0 if F belongs to LP for 1 less than or equal to P less than or equal to 2m by m minus 1. So remember, for P greater than 2m by m minus 1, we did not have a one radius theorem, in the sense that one radius was not enough to determine or prove injectivity. We needed two, so we need two radius for P greater than 2m by m minus 1. But for P between 1 and 2m by m minus 1, one radius is enough. So it's easy to see that for P between 1 and 2, this is trivial to prove, because nu R, that is a compactly supported measure, and you can take the Fourier transform and apply Pelley-Wiener theorem to conclude that F hat is 0. Okay, so for compactly, because the measure is compactly supported, and you can take the Fourier transform for P between 1 and 2, this follows immediately. So the non-trivial range is between 2 and 2m by m minus 1. So here also one, of course, takes the Fourier transform and concludes that the support of the Fourier transform of F is contained in the zero set of the Fourier transform of the measure, which is just the Bessel function, and so you will get spheres. And because of that, you cannot. So if you have a distribution which is supported on the sphere, you can prove that the Fourier transform of the distribution has maximal decay, like the Bessel function. That is the maximal decay you can get. And so if it is already in P LP for P less than or equal to 2m by m minus 1, it better be 0. Okay, so that is what happens here. So any questions? Okay, so if not, we move on to the Heisenberg group. So we have looked at Rn and spherical means on Rn. We go to Heisenberg group now, and then we'll define spherical means there. So Hn is the Heisenberg group identified with Cn cross R, not with the product, the direct product group law. The group law is Zt times Ws is Z plus W comma T plus S plus half imaginary part of Z dot W bar. W bar is the complex conjugate, and that part makes it a non-abelian group, but it's one of the simplest. It's a two-step nilpotent Lie group. Okay, and one defines spherical mean. So I'm not going to sort of justify why this is at least one definition of spherical means on the Heisenberg group. It's quite natural to define it this way. There are other means as well. So now we denote by mu r. So just to remind you of the notation, nu r was the measure on Rm, mu r would be the measure on Cn, that is the R2n, right? So you are looking at W in Cn with mod W equal to R, that is the sphere in Cn centered at 0 of radius R, and you are looking at the measure on that sphere, okay? View it as the measure on Hn with 0 mass on the center, which is the real line. And you define spherical means just like what we did earlier. You convolve a function with this measure, right? So f convolve with mu r at the point zt would be, well, you will write zt times ws inverse and d mu r ws, but mu r is supported only on the complement of the center, so it will be just integral over mod w equal to r, this expression. So the expression in the brackets come from the group law, right? Z minus the inverse of ws is minus w minus s, okay? So you simply apply the group law, you will get this. So this is the definition of the spherical means on the Heisenberg group, and we ask the same questions like any questions?
No, somebody has kept his mic on.
Please mute. I think that would be better. Okay, I think that's fine. Thank you. So this is the definition of the spherical means on the Heisenberg group, and we ask the same questions. Will injectivity hold for one radius? That is one radius theorem. Is that true, or do we need more than one radius, like the continuous functions on Rm and so on, right? Okay. So injectivity question is f convolved with mu r zt is 0 for every zt. So f convolved with mu r is identically 0. Does it imply f is 0, right? So r is fixed. So it's a theorem due to Thangvelu that the injectivity holds for the range 1 less than or equal to p strictly less than infinity. So if f is in LP for 1 less than or equal to p strictly less than infinity, and f convolved with mu r equal to 0, then f is 0. Okay. So we'll come to the proof by Thangvelu soon. Well, it's one of my favorites because he uses HUD analysis to prove things in integral geometry. So I consider this to be one of my favorites among many results by Thangvelu. And for p equal to infinity, so the one radius theorem is true for the range 1 less than to p strictly less than infinity, and then of course there is a question about what happens at p equal to infinity. There you need two radius theorem. So there you have you need two radii, again with some condition. I'll not get into the technicalities. And this is the theorem due to Marko Gronowski, Carlos Bernstein, Dustin Chang, and Daniel Pesquez. And the p equal to infinity theorem is essentially equivalent to a Wiener-Tauberian theorem for radial functions on L1, which is due to Hulanichki and Ritchie. Okay, so that is what they use. Essentially, as I mentioned with respect to Salzmann's theorem, these measures should generate a rather large class of functions, which should allow you to prove that f is 0. Right? That's the idea there. Okay, so we'll spend some time on Thangvelu's proof, because that's what we will be essentially imitating, and there are only minor differences to be explained. Okay, so what happened?
You were inactive for some time.
Oh, okay. But can you see the screen now?
Yeah. Now we can see.
Did you, so, I mean, the earlier screen was visible and whatever I said was heard, is it?
Yeah, there was some problem with the audio. You were frozen for just few seconds.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll repeat. So we are interested in the injectivity question on the Heisenberg group. So if convolve with mu r is 0 for every point, then does it imply f is 0? That is the injectivity question. We already know this. And it's a theorem due to Thangavelu that for p between 1 and infinity equal to 1 less than or equal to p strictly less than infinity. Sorry, we have the one radius theorem, that is f convolve with mu r 0 implies f is 0. At p equal to infinity, you need 2 radii, and this is a theorem due to Agrinovsky, Bernstein, Chang, and Pasquez, and it's essentially equivalent to an L1 Wiener-Tauberian theorem for what are known as radial functions on the Heisenberg group. Okay, radial here simply would mean that it's radial in the z variable. Okay. So just to recall, the injectivity range for Rm was 1 less than or equal to p less than to 2m by m minus 1, and injectivity range for Hn, that is the Heisenberg group, was p between 1 and infinity, strictly less than infinity. Okay. So, well, why does it happen? So if you go back to Rm, you see that the radial eigenfunctions of the Laplacian, that was the Bessel functions, that is what played the role. Phi lambda convolved with the nu r was 0, identically 0 if you chose the radius r suitably, right? And phi lambda was in LP for p greater than 2m by m. So it had something to do with the asymptotics or the decay of the radial eigenfunctions of the Laplacian. And on the Heisenberg group, the role of the Laplacian is played by what is known as the sublaplacian on Hn. Let me not define that. The radial eigenfunctions of the sublaplacian script L on Hn, one knows these things explicitly, and we'll need this notation ek lambda. So k runs from 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Lambda is a non-zero real. Ek lambda zt. So the t is the central variable in the center, and there it is simply an exponential e to the I lambda t. And you have a special function phi k lambda z. What is phi k lambda z? So the lambda simply is a dilation parameter. Phi k lambda is Lkn minus 1. Lkn minus 1 is the Laguerre polynomials of type n minus 1. So that's a polynomial at half mod lambda mod z square times exponential, right? The Gaussian e to the minus 1 by 4 mod lambda mod z square. Okay, so that is the expression. So this is an explicit expression we know for radial eigenfunctions of the sublaplacian on Hn. Well, why do they matter? They are going to appear in the spectral decomposition with respect to the sublaplacian. So just like what happens in the case of Rm, one can, if you write the Fourier inversion in polar coordinates, you have the spectral decomposition for the Laplacian on Rm, right? That is what is going to happen here as well, where these functions would appear. Now, these radial eigenfunctions satisfy a product formula. So remember the product formula we had in the Euclidean case, phi lambda convolved with nu r was phi lambda r times phi lambda, right? The eigenfunction was simply the same function evaluated at r, right? So something similar happens here. This is an important formula. And these two formulas, so let me say what the formula is. Ek lambda convolved with mu r. So remember, mu r is our measure for defining the spherical means. Mu r is the measure, normalized surface measure on the sphere of radius r centered at the origin in Cn, right? Viewed as a measure in Hn with zero mass on the center. These radial eigenfunctions are eigenfunctions for the convolution operator as well. Okay, so Ek lambda convolved with mu r at zt is phi k lambda r. So remember the phi k lambda r notation. Phi k lambda z is a radial function in z. So simply, you know, as I said earlier, we'll not bother about the distinction between a radial function and a function on the real, right? So phi k lambda r is the eigenvalue, and you get back your Ek lambdas. Okay, and of course, it's very easy to see that Ek lambda is in LP if and only if p equal to infinity, right? Because of the exponential e to the I lambda t. So in the t variable, it cannot be in any LP. Okay, so But the other part is in the z variable, it is very nice, right? Because it's a polynomial times an Gaussian. So it's a Schwartz class function. So it's in all LP. But in the t variable, it will be in LP only if p is infinity. And so, you see why the range is 1 less than or equal to p, strictly less than infinity. Of course, one still has to prove that, but the natural range one should aim for is this range, right? Because at p equal to infinity, you have this product formula, and you can choose an R such that phi k lambda is 0, right? Because Lkn minus 1 is a polynomial, orthogonal polynomial, and you know something about its zeros. So it has a positive 0. So you take appropriate R, you will get this to be identically 0, the convolution to be identically 0. And so the injectivity can hold only for p less than infinity, and that's precisely what Tangvelu proves. Okay. So to explain Tangvelu's proof, we need some details about the spectral decomposition of this Laplacian on the Heisenberg group. Okay, so the spectral decomposition has this this form. F of zt is summation k. So remember the eigenfunctions. Eigenfunctions are ek lambda, right? These are the radial eigenfunctions. K goes from 0 to infinity, k 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Lambda is a non-zero real. Okay. So f of zt is summation k equal to 0 to infinity integral over r. Well, r minus 0 strictly speaking. F convolved with ek lambda zt. Mod lambda to the n d lambda. So, you can compare it with what you know for the Euclidean case, where you write f as integral 0 to infinity, f convolved with phi lambda into lambda to the n minus 1 d lambda, right? That is how you will write the Euclidean Fourier inversion in polar coordinates. And it's essentially similar expression. Of course, one has to prove all this, and most of this is due to Stickart's. Or for L2, so this spectral decomposition, whatever we have written here, is understood in the L2 sense, that the right hand side converges in L2 to F. Okay, and each piece. So for a fixed k, you have that integral over R F convolved with ek lambda zt mod lambda to the n d lambda. That is your pkf zt. That is the projection. That's the spectral projection. So there's a theory behind this which I'm not explaining very well. The spectrum of the Laplacian is what is known as the Heisenberg fan. So you can think of this as certain rays starting from 0, and the pk will be the projection to one particular ray. Okay, one full ray. And that is the spectral projection there. Okay, and this convergence is in L2. That is part of the spectral theory. But what is important from our point of view, or for Tangvelu's proof, is that the spectral projections are bounded on LP for all p between 1 and strictly between 1 and infinity. So that's a result due to Stickart's. F going to pkf is bounded on LP of Hn for 1 less than p less than infinity. And one also has the Abel summability. So you want to sort of recapture your f from the spectral projections. In the L2 sense, you can simply add. That is okay. But for other LP, well, as you know, even the Fourier transform and so on, the convergence in the LP is an issue. One looks at Bochner-Riess means and things like that. Here one has the Abel summability. So limit r going to 1, summation k equal to 0 to infinity, r to the k, and whatever remains, that integral is the spectral projection pk, right? That converges to f in LP for 1 strictly less than p less than infinity. So a couple of words about what is happening here. What Stickart's does is to show that these operators, so there are two operators here, right? Pk, and for Abel summability, for each r you have an operator, right? So Pk and the operator for each fixed r both are Cauchy-Segment kernels on the Heisenberg group. So by a Cauchy-Segment kernel, I mean it has a certain homogeneity. The homogeneity, so it's like what happens on the real line with the Hilbert transform and like the Riesz transform on Rn, right, or Rm. So there is a homogeneity property for these kernels. It is so there is something called the homogeneous dimension, which we will come to when we start with H-type groups. And for the Heisenberg group, the homogeneous dimension is 2n plus 2. The topological dimension is 2n plus 1, right? It is Cn cross R. The homogeneous dimension is 2n plus 2. And these kernels have homogeneity minus of the homogeneous dimension. Okay, so like the Hilbert transform on the real line, homogeneity is minus 1. Riesz transform on Rm, the homogeneity is minus m. The corresponding homogeneity required for Cauchy-Segment kernels on the Heisenberg group is minus 2n plus 2. And one proves that these kernels have that property, and well, one needs little bit more. So again, if you go back to the Hilbert transform, you will see that 1 by x is an odd function. In the case of Riesz transforms also, it's an odd function. The kernel is an odd function, but one can replace the odd function by a cancellation condition that the integral over the sphere is 0. So a similar cancellation condition is required here. So if you have homogeneity of critical degree, that is minus of the homogeneous dimension and the cancellation condition, then these are genuine Cauchy-Segment kernels, and the convolution is bounded on L2, and the L2 boundedness implies LP boundedness. Okay, so this is basically the Cauchy-Segment theory on Rm and on appropriate nilpotent groups where there is a dilation and homogeneous groups and so on. So that is what Stickard does. Of course, there is more technicality involved, which I will not get into. But just to point out one thing, if you look at the Abel summability result, the first step is to write this as a convolution, right? So this is going to be, so forget the limit part, r going to 1. So you look at summation k equal to 0 to infinity, r to the k and the spectral projections, right? So this you can write as f convolved with some kernel. Now writing this as a kernel requires something, because remember this spectral project, the radial eigenfunctions are given by ek lambda. Ek lambdas were Laguerre polynomials times the Gaussian, right? And Laguerre polynomials have a generating function, right? So summation k equal to 0 to infinity r to the k lk n minus 1 can be computed. So you can explicitly compute the kernel of these operators. Okay, and how do you get the kernel for the projection pk? Well, that is simply differentiating this kernel with respect to r and put k times and put r equal to 0, right? So you will get the kth term, and that is how Stickard computes these kernels. And using the explicit expression for the kernel, Stickard proves that it has the cancellation condition, and you have the Abel summability. And the Abel summability proof uses two things. One is the standard part where you prove that the operators are uniformly bounded and there is convergence on a dense subspace. But to prove that the operators are uniformly bounded, Stickard uses a modification. Well, it actually follows from result due to Mike Christ about Hilbert transform along boundedness of Hilbert transform along curves. Okay, so that is something we will also be using. Okay, so this is essentially the Abel summability and the spectral decomposition of the function, and Tangevalue uses this. So let me give you the sketch of the proof. So remember the question is f convolved with mu r is 0. You want to conclude that f is 0. The assumption is that f is in LP for p 1 less than or equal to p strictly less than infinity. So the 1 less than or equal to p, you can so it is in the nature of these problems that you can always convolve f with a compactly supported smooth approximate identity, and assume f to be in any LP you want, right? Because once you convolve with an compactly supported smooth approximate identity, let's say phi convolved with f will be in LP for p greater than whatever LP f was already in, right? So the 1 can be avoided. You can assume it to be greater than or equal to 2 and so on. Okay, so the problem is f convolved with mu r is identically 0. You want to show f is 0. So first thing is to write, so remember mu r is a compactly supported measure, so f convolved with mu r is going to be in LP, and so it has a spectral decomposition just like what we saw earlier. So how do you get the spectral decomposition? Well, you will look at f convolved with mu r and then convolve it with ek lambda, right? Remember the spectral decomposition for f, that was f convolved with ek lambda and then some integral and summation and all that. So f convolved with mu r, you convolve with ek lambda, the radial eigenfunctions of this Laplacian, and use the product formula. Mu r convolved with ek lambda. So maybe I can write down here. Let's see if I can write down here. Yeah, okay. So mu r convolved with ek lambda. So this is also equal to ek lambda convolved with mu r. And so it will be something times ek lambda, right? This is what we know. Okay. So you, well, that's something that the eigenvalue is precisely the ek lambda r, right? So whatever is here, right? This is the eigenvalue. And so you put that there, and that is the spectral decomposition for f convolved with the mu r. Now f convolved with mu r is in LP, and so Abel summability can be used. So I can put an s to the k there and take the limit as it's going to 1, and this will converge to f convolved with mu r, but f convolved with mu r is identically 0, so the convergence is to 0. Okay. So now comes the spectral projections. Now remember, all these are in LP, and pk, the spectral projection, that f going to the spectral projection is a bounded operator on LP, so you simply apply that operator. So when you apply that operator, you get just one part of it, one piece of it. Any questions?
I asked, in Stirchard's theorem, is R going towards 1 through value smaller than 1? And similarly,
yes.
for the page here, S going towards 1 through value smaller than 1. That
Correct,
is
correct.
one question. And
Yes,
secondly, what is the convergence, point-wise or in LP or what?
In LP, Abel summability is in LP. So maybe I can go to the previous slide. So Abel summability is convergence in LP for 1 less than p less than infinity, and r going to 1 for smaller values of r. Okay, so r less than 1. Yeah, I should have written 1 minus or whatever that is. Okay, so I have the spectral.
Thank you.
I have the spectral decomposition for f convolved with mu r, and Abel summability tells me that this limit will have to be 0, right? Because f convolved with mu r is 0. Apply the projection, you will get one piece, right? Because all the other pk sees only the kth piece, and so s to the k disappears because it is going to 1, right? So what you have is a very nice expression, integral over r phi k lambda f convolved with ek lambda zt mod lambda to the n d lambda. So now what remains is Euclidean distribution theory essentially, but one has to justify this. So you can conclude that the distributional Fourier transform of f, well, it's not exactly f, it's something very close to f, in the t variable, that is the central variable, is supported in the 0 set of that eigenvalue. Okay, so what is happening is this expression that has this can be simplified into e to the I lambda t f super lambda. I am not going to define what that is, star lambda phi k lambda. So this is called the twisted convolution. Now, of course, this will make sense only for p less than or equal to 2, right? Because you want to write f super lambda, which is the Fourier transform of f. But see the e to the I lambda t there. So this simply means that Fourier transform of some function is 0, which means the function is 0. But what is the function? Function is this guy multiplied with this guy. So that is 0, right? So the distributional Fourier transform of this expression here will be supported in the 0 set of the phi k lambda r, which is a finitely many points, right? Because it is the polynomial times the Gaussian, so it is finitely many points, and so you can conclude that it cannot be in any LP for p less than infinity, right? So that is the proof by Thangavelu, and we imitate this proof exactly as it is. The difference lies in the proof of whatever proof we need. So if for this proof we need the Abel-summability and the boundedness of LP boundedness of the spectral projection. There we differ slightly from Stickard's approach. So yeah, I'll see if I have enough time to say that. So now we come to H-type groups. So what is an H-type group? So H-type meaning Heisenberg type. So it's very close to being Heisenberg group. It's just that it has a bigger center. So remember that for the Heisenberg group, the center was one-dimensional, the real line. Here you can have a higher dimensional center. So formally, it is a two-step nilpotent. Well, start with the nilpotent two-step nilpotent Lie algebra, which admits orthogonal decomposition. V directs some Z, where Z is the center of G. Okay. And the connected, simply connected Lie group, whose Lie algebra is G, you denote it by capital G, and identifying. So this is standard in nilpotent groups. You can identify the Lie algebra and the Lie group, and put a group law on the Lie algebra, so that you can work with the Lie algebra as the Lie group. Okay, so then it becomes so V1 Z1 into V2 Z2 is going to be V1 plus V2. So in the first coordinate, it is just the usual addition. In the central variables, that is Z1 and Z2, I have Z1 plus Z2 plus half bracket of V1 V2. That is the Lie bracket, and Lie bracket of V1 V2 will land up in Z, right? Because it is a two-step nilpotent Lie algebra. Okay. Now such a two-step group is called H-type group if the following is satisfied. For each point in the center, one can define this map called J subset from V to V, that is the complement of the center to the complement of the center, via that formula JZV V prime equal to Z inner product with VV prime. This defines it, okay, because VV prime, the bracket VV prime is in the center, so the right hand side is well defined, and similarly the left hand side. Okay, so that defines what JZ is, and G is called H type if JZ square is minus mod Z square times the identity of V. Okay, so any Z with the norm 1 defines a complex structure on V. So V will have to be even dimensional. Okay, so that is why for all practical purposes you can think of an H-type group as V can be identified with Cn because it has even dimension, and Rm is the center. So the center, the only thing to notice is that the center has bigger dimension. And if the center is one dimensional, it reduces to the Heisenberg group. And the representation theory and harmonic analysis on H-type groups, they are very similar to what that is happening on Hn. Of course, there are quite a lot of other differences, but let's not worry about that now. So now keep Cn cross Rm in mind, and we will do whatever we did on the Heisenberg group and see how things go. Now, because the center has higher dimensions, one can define different spherical means. Again, I'll not get into justifications of why these are called spherical means and things like that. In some cases, of course, there are more general objects one can look at, but let's stick to this for the time being. So I'll define three means on an H-type group. One is the standard spherical means. So it's going to be denoted by mu r, because remember mu r is going to be the normalized surface measure on the sphere in Cn, right? So my notation there is wrong. It is not z comma 0. It should be, oh, okay, yeah, this is fine. Z is in Cn. Okay, so z comma 0 mod z equal to r. That is the sphere in Cn, and mu r is the normalized surface measure we saw earlier, right? And you can define the spherical means by convolving f with mu r. So you will get z minus w, t minus half z bracket w. The z bracket w is imaginary z dot omega bar w bar for the Heisenberg group. Okay, that is the Lie bracket operation there. Okay, so that is one set of spherical means. You can define bispherical means. This is because you have a bigger center. What you do is you look at the product measure mu r is whatever we have just defined earlier, and nu s. So remember my first slide on Rm, we used nu for measures on Rm. So nu s is the normalized measure on the sphere in the center part. Okay, so mod t equal to s. On the Heisenberg group, this doesn't give you anything new because mod t equal to s will be just the 2 points, right? S and minus s. And then you convolve, right? Bispherical means of f. So we call it bispherical means of f. So that is f convolved with mu r s. So r is for the radius in the sphere, radius of the sphere in Cn. S is for the radius of the sphere in the central part, Rm, right? And of course, you can write down the convolution explicitly like this using the group law. Okay, the third one requires a little bit of definitions. These are called homogeneous spherical means. So there is a homogeneous norm on H-type groups, and one uses that norm to define the unit sphere and dilate it to get measures. Okay, so let me start with dilations. So G admits dilations. These act as automorphisms of G. So this is similar to the dilation on Rm, right? You can multiply a vector by a positive number, right? So that's precisely what is happening. But the dilation, it has to act like automorphism. So you have delta r zt equal to rz comma r square t. Remember the group law had a term like a bracket of zw, right? So that will bring in an r square. Hello, any questions?
No, there are no questions.
Yeah, but there is some echo. Okay. So for r greater than 0, define these dilations delta r zt to be rz into r comma r square t. The r square is needed so that it is an automorphism of the group. Okay, so if you write down the group law, you will see that. And that you can define a homogeneous norm. So homogeneity simply means the second equality delta r zt equal to r times mod zt. So compare it with what is happening on Rm. If I multiply x with an r and take the modulus, I'll get an r outside, right? That's precisely the thing. Because the dilation is rz and r square t, the norm has a slightly different form than what you see in than the Euclidean norm. So that is mod z to the 4 plus mod t square to the 1 by 4. Some people will put a 16 t square or some other constant there because it has something to do with the fundamental solution of the sublaplace. Okay, so we have the dilations, we have the homogeneous norm, and then whatever you know on Rm, the polar coordinates, that is true. That is, the integral over G can be written as integral over 0 to infinity, integral over the unit sphere. And if you look at the polar coordinates in Rm, you see f of Rw something coming. That Rw is the dilation. So that is delta Rx. D sigma x. So what is sigma? Sigma is the unique radon measure on the unit sphere, so that this equality is true. So this is the analogous of the normalized surface measure on the unit sphere in Rm, right? So we have the homogeneous unit sphere zt, that's that mod zt equal to 1, where modulus is the homogeneous norm, and you have a unique measure sigma there, which gives me this equality. And once you have this measure on the sphere, you can define the measure on sphere of radius r by dilating it, right? So you define sigma r. So sigma is what we will use for homogeneous spherical means. So sigma r is delta r sigma. That means you dilate your measure on the unit sphere by this definition. So integral over g f g d sigma r. So I am defining sigma r by dilating f and then integrating over the unit sphere. That's precisely what happens on Rm, right? And the homogeneous spherical means are simply the convolution of f with these measures, right? So And we are interested in this. So we have three means: standard spherical means, bispherical means, which is the average of the function over spheres, product of spheres in the complement of the center and the center, and the average of the function over spheres defined using the homogeneous norm, right? So these are three means, and we are interested in the injectivity question. So this is the main result. All the three means defined above are injective in the range 1 less than or equal to p less than or equal to 2m by m minus 1. So the range here is 2m by m minus 1. Compare it with what is happening on Rm, right? Because we'll see why. Okay, yeah, I may not be giving you the examples here, but yeah, I'll try to comment on it. So that is, if I take a measure mu in mu r s, sigma r. So remember, mu r is the spherical means, mu r s is the bispherical means, sigma r is the homogeneous spherical means. And if f is in LP for p between 1 and 2m by m minus 1, including the endpoints, and if the convolution is identically 0, f is identically 0. Okay, so this is the main result. Now, well, how do we prove this? We just follow whatever is there in Tanguvulu's paper. But we need to prove whatever Stickart's proved, right? So we need the spectral decomposition of the Laplacian on G, which means we need radial eigenfunctions and then convolve and see. But this is known. Abel summability in LP, we have to prove that. And if you look at the proof, you will see that the product formula for eigenfunctions, radial eigenfunctions of the sublaplacian appearing in the spectral decomposition was used crucially, right? So we need that. And then if you look at the last step in Tanguvulu's proof, you will see that Fourier transform on Euclidean space on the real line supported on points and so on, right? That forced p to be that forced the function to be 0 because p was less than infinity. So we need something similar. Yeah. Okay. So sketch of the proof. For A, so yeah, so note the similarities. A in Rm minus 0. In the Heisenberg case, we had real line minus 0. Real line was the center. Here Rm is the center. So for non-zero points in the center, we defined EKAZT to be e to the I A inner product T. In the Heisenberg case, it was e to the I lambda T. And phi mod AZ, where phi mod AZ has the same meaning. Okay, so EKA is a standard notation. I'm not using it because they are my initials. We had EK lambda and EKA and so on. Okay, so these are standard notation. So it looks very similar to what is there on the Heisenberg group, except that you have a bigger center and so you have an exponential e to the I A inner product T. And the L2 spectral decomposition is easy. This is well known. Of course, many people use it. All those people who work with multiplier theorems have seen this. F set T is, so this is again the spectral decomposition, integral over Rm F convolved with EKA. That is what is coming inside, right? So in the Heisenberg case, it was integral over R, right? So you take one piece of that and that is your spectral projection, right? So script AKFZT is your spectral projection, and you prove that it is bounded on LP and you prove the Abel summability. Okay, so this is the analog of Stickart's result for the H-type group G. Okay, but the difference lies in the proof. So as I had mentioned, Stickart's had explicit expressions for the kernels. We can also get explicit expressions for the kernels, except that it's a somewhat horrendous expression which doesn't help us proving even the cancellation condition, except when the dimension of the center is odd. Okay, so we had to find a different proof, but that turned out to be somewhat easier actually. So we have different proofs for the boundedness of the spectral projection and Abel summability, but the Abel summability proof uses Mike Christ result. So remember I had mentioned this. Christ has the strong result which talks about Hilbert transform along curves on homogeneous nilpotent groups. So you take a curve which is an odd homogeneous curve in a nilpotent group and look at Hilbert transform along that curve. And what he proves is that these operators are bounded on LP independent of the curve. So there is a uniform bound on these operators, and that is very crucially used here in the Abel summability. So once you have analog of Stickard's result, whatever remains is an imitation of what Thangavelu has done, right? The main point is that when you convolve the spectral, so you can look at the spectral decomposition and you convolve with the measures you have. So you have three measures, right? You have mu r, s, and sigma r. When you convolve with the radial eigenfunctions here, that is EKA, you should get an eigenvalue. That means these are all eigenvalues for that convolution operator. So that happens. Okay, so that is the product formula. So if mu is one of these measures, then EKA convolved with mu ZT can be written as mu k comma mod A. So the dependence is on mod A, EKA ZT. So EKA are eigenfunctions for this convolution. Okay, and the dependence on the eigenvalue is in A is mod A. Okay, that also is important. And one knows this explicitly in the first two cases. Okay, the first two cases are the spherical mean, standard spherical means, and the bispherical mean. So this is essentially due to a theorem by Damek and Ricci that these functions with certain property form a commutative Banach algebra, and these functions appear as bounded spherical functions. That means multiplicative linear functionals for those algebras. Okay, from that one can deduce these. So that's why it's called the product formula. So this resembles, in the previous two cases, it was actually the product formula for the spherical functions for Gelfand pairs associated with those groups. Here one cannot say that these are Gelfand pair situation all the time. There are cases when it is. Again, this is these are results due to Ricci, Kaplan, and so on. But the product formula continues to be true. Okay, so which is a result due to Damek and Ricci, and that's what we use to establish this product formula. And one can continue as in Thangvelu's proof that if you look at F convolved with mu, and if it is 0, you have the Abel summability, which will tell you that limit b going to 1, k equal to 0 to infinity, that expression is 0. Then you apply spectral projection operator, you will get one piece, right? That's what we did in the Heisenberg case, and you will have exactly the same situation, except that now you have an integral over Rm, right? And what you do, you do exactly what you did earlier. You conclude that the Fourier transform of well, exactly not f, exactly f super A convolved with phi k and all that. That is supported in the zero set of these eigenvalues in the variable A, but it is radial. So the 0z would be a collection of spheres, and once you have the spheres, the maximum decay you can get is the Bessel function decay, which restricts the range to be p less than or equal to 2m by m minus 1. Okay, so that is the difference between the Heisenberg and the H-type. And I'll stop with this. The first two cases, mu r and mu r s, these two cases, the range is optimal. So for p greater than 2m by m minus 1, using these radial eigenfunctions, you can construct examples which will tell you that the one radius theorem is not true. In the third case also it is probably true, but we don't know the eigenvalue explicitly. But we know that it has only discrete zeros in mod A because of or mod T because of certain holomorphicity properties. So that is the end of the talk. Thank you.
So thank you very much for a nice talk. So now, are there any questions or comments?
Very nice talk, Naru.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Can you remark on two-step Milford and Lee groups? Or is it maybe?
Okay, so this this method will hopefully extend to Metivier groups, which is anyway being done by Rajesh Srivastava and his students. But there are some difficulties because, see, in our case, proving cancellation condition, Abel's mobility, etc., use the fact that the kernels appearing are radial in the central variable. Is that helped in computation? So there will be technical difficulties when you go to material group. If you go to general nilpotent group, then I don't know how one defines. Well, one may have to define the spherical means.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe for whenever there is a Gelfand pair situation, it may be possible because you will have all this product formula and so on. But the hard part would be proving the Abel summability and the LP boundedness of the spectral projections. So that will have to use singular integral theory on nilpotent groups.
Thank you.
Some more questions?
I can extend my question which I asked. Will there be certain f's for which you can even take r bigger than 1? That means the growth condition for the adjoining integral, is very slow. That is converging to 0.
Yeah, it may be possible because let's see. So the operators. So if I fix an R and I look at that operator, I need to prove that they are uniformly bounded.
Okay.
In R, right? Wow. So the norm, if I remember, is something like 1 plus R to the some power, some negative power multiplied with something. So yeah, one may be able to take R greater than 1. Yeah. I'll have to check that. Yeah.
Yeah, defining is not a problem. You can simply take F from the range of the heat semigroup.
Yes,
Proving, I mean, the convergence you cannot.
Convergence, yeah, that is true. Yeah, one has to be more careful because even in the L2 convergence, it would be a problem, right?
Wonderful.
I have, yes. Is there anything known for Lorentz spaces?
So what is a Lorentz space?
When you have this LP R.
Oh, I see. Okay. No, I have no idea. Yeah, that's a question even on Euclidean spaces. So because these phi lambdas will belong to L something, right? L2m by m minus 1 infinity or something. So maybe you can do an improvement at the end point. Yeah, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Are there some more questions? Otherwise, we can unmute and then thank the speaker.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe you can stop recording also.
Yeah. Okay.